1848, one of the most infamous years in European history. This year was significant purely for the fact that it had the potential to be one of the greatest turning points in European history. Yet, Europe failed to make this turn. Now, you may be asking yourself, why was this single year so significant to the point where it could cause a major turning point? The importance of this year is rooted in one thing: revolution. A series of revolutions would take place within France, the German Confederation, the Italian city-states, Austria, and many other areas. But the first four are the most important, and the ones that we will focus on today. They stood for values of nationalism, liberalism, and sometimes even radicalism. They are important because this is the first time since the French Revolution where Europeans fought to implement their different ideas and challenge the conservative order. All of these revolutions failed, which is the reason why Europe was unable to turn at this potential turning point. So, that leads me to ask, what if the revolutions of 1848 succeeded? Before we proceed, we must define what success is. A successful revolution for this scenario will be one that lasts for a significant amount of time and one that achieves the basic goal. An example of this would be a unified Italy or an independent Hungary. Now, with success defined, how exactly would these revolutions succeed? In this alternate timeline, the French liberals would have worked more munition in the choices that were made in their young republic, and Napoleon III would never be invited back to France from Switzerland. This would allow the Second French Republic to survive longer than it did in this timeline, and not have Napoleon III ever take presidency. A united Germany would come about if Frederick William IV actually accepted the crown as constitutional monarch over a united German state, rather than throwing it away like a spoiled little brat. The Italians, with victory at Custoza, will be able to knock out Austria from the Italian peninsula. This will create a unified Italian state between Sardinia, Piedmont, Lombardy, Venice, Tuscany, Modena, and Parma. After the Pope flees the Papal States, the Roman Republic is still created, but they wouldn't be as threatened since Napoleon III isn't present to assist the Pope in this timeline. As for the Sicilians, they would just have to win against their Bourbon overlords, but once the northern Italians cleaned up their problems, they'd likely send support to the Sicilians because, well, Italian boys gotta look out for each other, am I right? Finally, the liberals and Hungarian nationalists within Austria would just have to overwhelm the Austrian government to a point where Austria would be forced to surrender. The terms of Austrian surrender would likely be a new liberal Austrian government and an independent Hungarian state. For all of these revolutions to occur, the concert of Europe must be non-existent, or if it does exist, be very weak, and the revolutionaries themselves have to be very united in their respective countries and getting their goals done. With all of these factors accounted for, we could be looking at a brand new history of Europe. Some of the immediate effects of this scenario would be true Italian unification. In the 1850s, after winning their independence, northern Italy, Sicily, and the Roman Republic would all unite into one united Italian state. This would be a constitutional monarchy under Charles Albert of Sardinia-Piedmont. This was because of his popularity among many Italians for his liberal policies as a king. But there are a lot of plot holes. Number one, why would the Roman Republic agree to be under a king? And number two, what about the two Sicilies? The Romans had established their republic because they assassinated their prime minister, Pellegrino Rossi, and the Pope had fled the city. Ultimately, the people within the republic would have supported national unity over having a republic, so they would have been fine with having the king as long as he wasn't an absolutist and held liberal ideals. The two Sicilies would still be around though, and for true Italian unification, they would need to join the rest of Italy. The thing is, they wouldn't join without a fight. The Italian states would likely have to either conquer the Bourbon nation, or, just like our time, the people within it would have to revolt. Either way, blood will be spilled for this Italy to be whole. Another country that would expand its borders for the sake of unity is Germany. Austria lost most of its land to the newly created Hungarian state, and with that, many of the minorities within Austria would be in Hungarian land. With this, there would be a new support for the Grossdeutsch movement, a united Germany with Austria. Support for this would be stronger in southern Germany because it can challenge the Protestant majority in the north. The small, liberal Austrian state will comply and join Germany. A united Germany, especially with Austria, would be a major game changer in the politics of Europe. It would swiftly become one of the most powerful nations on the continent, and the nationalist governing middle class would pursue to unite all German territories, such as Switzerland and the Danish holding of Schleswig-Holstein. This would be a threat in the eyes of the United Kingdom, however, and even without the strength of the concert of Europe, would believe in the balance of power within Europe. Germany disturbed the balance within Europe, and it would make matters worse if they chased after these territories. Tensions began to rise. 1853. Another significant year in European history. If you're diligent in that topic, you know that's when the Crimean War starts. A quick crash course on the Crimean War in our universe. Russia wants territory in the Ottoman Empire, specifically the Holy Land, and they want to annex it for the purpose of defending Eastern Orthodox Christians. This wasn't genuine, however, as Russia wanted to just have more territory. France, Sardinia, Piedmont, and Britain intervene to defend the Ottomans, and war breaks out. There are some battles, but then the real action of the war happens in Crimea, specifically in Sevastopol. After a year of a bloody stalemate, the war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1856, with minor Russian losses. In this universe, Russia would still attempt to seize Ottoman lands, except there wouldn't be as much opposition to it. Without Napoleon III in France, only Britain and the now united Italy would come to the aid of the Ottomans. During this time, however, with the revolutions of 1848 in recent memory, Balkan separatist movements could work together and achieve their independence while the Ottomans were distracted at war. The war would likely end in a stalemate. Just like in our timeline, Russia loses a lot of men and money from this war, and it still marks a point where Russia becomes more accepting of progress. The Ottomans, on the other hand, will be overwhelmed by the rebels and lose practically all of its territory in Europe to them. Serbia, Montenegro, Bulgaria, Moldavia, and Wallachia would all gain independence following the war. It may not be this exact scenario, but these revolutions in the Balkans show how the revolutions of 1848 could have been an inspiration to many Europeans to take matters into their own hands and fight to create a better future for themselves. While Europe's borders were changing, social life in Europe had been changing as well. The Second French Republic had achieved universal male suffrage and the right to assembly in their nation. In Germany, an economic policy of laissez-faire would be put in place, and the government would have little to no say within many economic matters. The people in United Italy would have much more national pride, which increases national morale. Railroads being built across these nations would help them be more centralized and speed up the spread of information. Eventually, at some point, the economy would go through a rough period. This can be any time from the 1860s all the way to the 1900s, but it would drive people to be upset with their governments. If these governments didn't find a solution to this, that means the people could turn against them, which would lead to riots, which would lead to many other bad things. Luckily, for them, there was a solution to the south of their homes, Africa. This universe would have its own scramble for Africa in times where the economy is down to keep their people from rebelling. The effects of it would be the same, with many abuses and scandals occurring. Europe would once again just use Africa for its own economic benefit. Also during this time, many alliances would be established. Due to the amount of power that Germany held within Western Europe, Britain, Italy, Denmark, and France created an alliance with each other. This was for their defense in case war ever happened, and with rising tensions, war was certainly on the horizon. The Hungarian-hating Austrians in Germany would likely push for alliances with states such as Romania and Croatia, which held the same resentment towards Hungary. Russia would make alliances with many of the other Slavic countries, especially in the Balkans, including Croatia. Remember that. These are key alliances that could have been formed in the times of this period. Notice the rivalry between states, such as Germany and Hungary. This will all be important in 1 minute. Sometime around the 1890s to 1900s, a very significant event would occur. For decades, the Hungarian state often had to deal with Romanian nationalists within Transylvania, a historically Romanian region Hungary had possession of. Those Hungarians must really like vampires. I don't know. Anyway, many Romanian nationalists in Transylvania would rampage through the city. This was an act of terrorism. This was the spark needed. Tensions escalate. Suspecting this is the doing of the Romanians, Hungary declares war on Romania. Germany, who is allied to Romania, declares war on Hungary. Croatia, which is allies with Germany, would declare war on Hungary as well, and the Slavic Balkan nations would back them up, meaning that Russia would also declare war on Hungary. Finally, to keep order within Europe, Britain, Italy, France, and Denmark would all declare war on Germany and Russia, lending their support to the Hungarians. Well, this seems awfully familiar. Yes, something similar to World War I would occur in this timeline. The tensions between European nations would occur in almost any circumstance, and a great war similar to the First World War would ultimately happen. It may not be this exact scenario, but the buildup of tensions and developments in technology would inevitably lead to a world war. Even in this universe where a great turning point within European history actually happens, some things are just impossible to avoid. The revolutions of 1848 would turn Europe into a much more liberal continent earlier than it did in our timeline. Yes, but many of the same events would happen. This is just one example of what could happen within Europe if the revolutions of 1848 succeeded. But there are trillions of other scenarios that could occur. That is the beauty of alternate history.